What's up, noobs? I have finally gotten around to this second episode of the NYC Condo conversion that I've been working on, and the focus of this video is on preparing the set of construction plans that we file with the DOB, which is the Department of Buildings. So if you're working on any kind of residential project yourself, maybe even your own home, or you want to learn what goes into some of the pre-development work, then I hope this video can help you learn from my design process. And stick around to the end because I'll sum up my decision-making framework so you can use it yourself. Alright, so the whole process actually started about 5 months ago, which was before we closed on the property and before I even joined Clear Mountain Capital. You basically start with what's existing, and you ask yourself, how do I get the highest and best use out of this property while minimizing my risk? It's actually a pretty quick exercise, and you can figure this step out in one sitting. And if you do enough of these back-of-the-envelope analyses, it pretty much becomes second nature. So here's the floor plan of the existing building. It's 4 stories with a cellar, and I did a walkthrough in the first episode, so check that out if you haven't seen it already. The zoning code actually allows us to build an additional 2,600 or so square feet. So the big design decision was how do we add that space to the building to make the financials work? So we did what's called a massing study, where we analyzed different possibilities based on the zoning regulations. This definitely doesn't show all the possibilities, but you can see we didn't want to knock down the existing structure. It's still in great shape. We basically considered going taller and skinnier versus fatter and shorter, because the zoning code puts limits on the shape of the structure as it gets taller, because the city wants to preserve as much sunlight that reaches its way down to the street level. So they set this thing called a sky exposure plane. There's pros and cons to both of these schemes, and we had to consider costs, marketability, and livability. And ultimately, we went for maximum fatness, going straight up 2 stories and extending the back by about 10 feet. That way, everyone gets a balcony, layouts are pretty similar on each floor, which makes a lot of things easier during construction, and the penthouse gets a roof deck. The next step was to figure out the unit mix and how to lay out each floor, and we examined a couple ideas with 2 units on each floor as well as full floor units. Now this part of the process might take a few weeks, which may seem like a long time, but keep in mind this happens while you're raising money, talking to banks, negotiating the price, building your pro forma, and you might also be looking at 5 other deals at the same time and doing the exact same thing. Now, we wanted these to be entry-level luxury condos, which typically perform really well in NYC no matter what's going on in the market. But the smaller 2-unit per floor layouts weren't really doing it for us, so we settled on full floor units. I have seen hundreds of full floor unit plans in 20 to 25 foot wide buildings, and personally worked on a few in NYC myself, and they're basically all variations on the same theme. You have 2 bedrooms in the rear of the building, or sometimes even just 1 huge bedroom, and a living room in the front. And they're situated in the front and back because they're both required to have access to light and air. Everything else goes in the center, a hallway with bathrooms, the kitchen, stairwell, and elevator. Given the zoning and ADA restrictions, there's not a lot else you can do here. But the devil is in the details, and I could probably work on dozens of these buildings, and no 2 will be precisely the same when you start getting down to the inches. The most logical approach at this stage is really to start with what you can't change. Or, let me rephrase, what's cost prohibitive to the point that you only have one option? And for this project, that was the elevator location. In a 20-foot wide building, there are very few places that you can put an elevator, and in a gut rehab, certain elements stay put. The existing entry is on the right side, and the stairs make sense where they are, so the best place to put the elevator was right behind the stairs. Anywhere else, and you lose precious apartment space to hallway space, which is not sellable square feet. So the interiors were really designed around the elevator in this particular spot, all the way down to the cellar and up to the roof with these huge machine rooms and control rooms. Remember, the center has to contain the kitchens, bathrooms, hallway, and closet spaces, and we went through a lot of iterations of these layouts. We also played around with which side the master versus second bedroom should go, and if we should have a bigger living room or a small office plus a living room. Here's some of the early iterations, and feel free to pause and stare at them more closely, but most of these were scrapped. But don't worry, I am going to go into excruciating detail in the last half of this video and show you how we got to the final filing set in a minute. But these were mostly thrown out because as we assembled the team, we learned more about the detailed constraints. And now I want to take a little bit of time to talk about the importance of the team. The team that works on construction plans typically include the developer, an architect, an interior designer, an MEP engineer, a structural engineer, a general contractor, and a development marketing broker. Everybody brings different views and constraints to the table. The architect is familiar with the zoning code, but also draws on all his experience from previous floor plans. The interior designer proposes interior layouts, appliances, fixtures, and finish materials. The MEP engineer figures out where big mechanical systems go, along with electrical, plumbing, and gas lines. He also tells us what our limits are for any kinds of pipes or appliances related to those things. The structural engineer tells us if the building can stand based on our designs. And if not, he tells us what kind of support structures we need to build. Then the GC tells us how feasible or expensive it is to build all these things. Then the development marketing broker works on overall sales and marketing strategy and will provide their opinion on how brokers would typically react to specific design elements. And finally, as the developers, one of the other partners and I have to take everyone's expertise into consideration and lead the optimization of the plans. So we have to thoroughly understand potential problems, come up with solutions, account for the chain reaction of effects from each solution, and in a lot of cases, we have to make some trade-offs. Now, depending on the project and the developer, when the team is assembled can vary quite a bit. A developer who does the same type of project in one city all the time might have a core team in place that they do every single deal with. Some might even do so many of one type of deal that they just have their own in-house team that handles the entire process. On the other hand, a developer who's working on a variety of asset classes and regions will have different teams depending on what and where they're building, and therefore assemble the team throughout closing. And that's what we did on this deal, because we've got a bunch of other deals throughout Connecticut, and we needed local condo conversion experts from NYC. So the process of getting bids and getting input from team members started a couple months before closing and continued up until, well, the filming of this video. Okay, so back to the plan. Here's the progress set of the floor plan that the team had when I joined 2 months ago, because I was actually one of those assembled team members throughout this whole process. And having done a bunch of NYC renovations in condos myself, I of course brought a bunch of my own opinions as we pushed to a filing ready set. So, street facing, we've got this living room and a small office. The living room is open to the kitchen, which is where the stairwell and elevator open into the apartment. To the right, we've got a hallway where there's a washer-dryer closet, mechanicals, and behind the walls, we've got 2 bathrooms. One's the master bath, which is ensuite to the master bed with a walk-in closet in between. The other is a secondary bath, and the second bedroom also has a walk-in closet. Both bedrooms have sliding glass doors that open onto a rear balcony and fire escape. Now, if you want some practice on how to think through layouts, hit pause again on the plan right now and go grab a pen and paper and write down everything that you hate about this plan, because that is exactly what I did before the first team meeting I joined. Now try to visualize the space and walk through the floor plan and identify spots that would bother you if you owned and lived in this apartment, and then write some notes about how you would fix it. This basically became part of an iterative process in our meetings, because the other partner and I would propose some changes, and everyone else on the call would either bring up other considerations, trade-offs, or straight up tell me why it wouldn't work. Sounds harsh, but developers hear the word no a lot, and we develop a super thick skin and very strong problem-solving skills to get around it. Okay, ready? Here are the problems that I spotted in this draft. First, you walk into the apartment, and where do you hang your coat? And I'm Asian, so where do I put my shoes? We need an entry closet. Next, I hate the top right corner of the kitchen. It is dead space to me. I've seen this kitchen layout in so many apartments, and I have a similar one in my own kitchen, and I hate this corner. The opposite corner has a problem too. We actually spent so much time on the kitchen that it's going to get the entire next episode, so don't forget to hit that subscribe button and the like button too while you're at it. Now, on top of all that, our architect needed us to specify the kitchen appliances for the filing set because the specs factor into the mechanical plans. Even though it's not necessary to pick the exact make and model, and in all likelihood the current models wouldn't even be in production by the time of installation, we did have to pick placeholders, and we'd have to stick to those dimensions when it comes time to install. For the bathrooms, we actually had no issues with the layouts, but we did need to pick the fixtures again so the engineer could put specs into the plans, because he needed to know the flow rate of any faucet we picked, which affects the pipe thickness. The actual colors and finishes don't actually matter at this point, so those are chosen in a later process where we focus on the interior design finish materials. So, any one of these individual points don't seem all that hard to address, but given the limited space that we could work with, every little change causes a ripple effect throughout the entire building, like where mechanicals go in the cellar and on the roof. So it's really been a battle for inches. The first thing I proposed was an entry closet, and I suggested 2 spots, bringing out the wall by the stairwell or squeezing it in the hallway. But putting it adjacent to the stairwell wall encroached the required wheelchair turning radius, so that was out. So we squeezed the washer-dryer area and carved out a closet. But this meant that we had to shrink the kitchen and lose the dining area. And I was like, whoa, that is not worth the closet. Let's look to the right of the plan. Lo and behold, the second bedroom could sacrifice its glorious walk-in closet for the greater utility of a shared hallway closet. Sorry, second bedroom. But wait, said the mechanical engineer, don't shift around the mechanical shaft too much because you have an entire array of kitchen vents and water supply lines running all the way to the cellar. It needs to be adjacent to the hot water heater. And to complicate things further, I said, hey, I still have another objection. I really hate that corner in the kitchen and I am not letting this go. So we played Tetris with the kitchen appliances and pipes and vents and countertops and shelving and closets until we finally came up with this. And everyone was satisfied that it's physically possible without blowing up the budget. This whole exercise involves shopping for appliances and cabinets and taking some site measurements and getting back to the team and going back and forth. So that's why it's going to get its own video next episode. On the living room side, we ultimately decided to scrap the small office and make the living room bigger. And on the bedroom side, we made just a slight tweak by adding a linen closet because I felt that this space really wasn't very functional otherwise. At best, you could put a dresser or something, but it's NYC. Storage space is valuable. There were also some pretty long discussions about the balcony because wherever you have any large, heavy structure floating beyond the wall, the structural engineer has a lot to say. And note that there's a fire escape sticking along the top over here. That's because NYC and the fire department required two means of egress, and there's no way that we could fit another set of stairs in the building without losing some serious square footage. Anyway, we had some pretty lengthy discussions about what the structural supports and railing will look like and how to make it more visually appealing. And the final huge pain in the was the elevator. We had to sign this subcontractor fairly early in the process because the size of the elevator affected so many other things. The stairwell had very little wiggle room because it's based on minimum landing sizes, and the number of steps is based on ceiling heights on each floor. Meanwhile, the elevator needs a pit in the cellar and needs to clear the party wall by a certain amount for the structural support, and it also needs a huge machine room at the top as well as a ventilated control room. And since the control room was across from the mechanical shaft, we can't run joists wall to wall on the roof, so we need steel beams. We also needed to make sure that we have a 6-foot wide path for fire egress per the FDNY code. So you probably see by now it's a lot of stuff you have to solve for, and these issues come up little by little. Anyway, I won't bore you with any more of these kind of details, but you can see where the final location is, and it factored in all these little considerations. Alright, as promised, I'm going to end this video with what's really going to help you out if you're doing any kind of residential project of your own and you find yourself managing a team of architects, engineers, contractors, designers, and whatnot. I've broken it down into 6 things I think about for any design consideration in the building, prioritized in order of importance. Number 1 is zoning code requirements, and this is number 1 because satisfying these are not optional. There may not necessarily be consistency from the DOB in how they interpret the zoning code, but regardless, we have to follow it to the best of our ability. So the starting point for any layout decision is it legal? Otherwise, we'd have to consider zoning variances, and that is definitely out of the scope of this project. Number 2 is living experience. This is a consumer product after all. And if we don't design for a great living experience, it won't sell quickly. I design very empathetically, so I usually draw from experiences from places that I've lived before, whether it's apartments, houses, hotels, Airbnbs, you name it. When you experience exceptionally good or bad design elements firsthand, you tend not to forget them. So I use that experience to inform layouts, and you'll definitely see in excruciating detail how I applied this mentality to the kitchens and baths in the next couple of videos. Number 3 is marketability. Now there's a subtle difference between living experience and what markets well. For example, the colors and materials of the kitchen cabinets can have a pretty big effect on buyers, but functionally, there's no difference in the living experience. Number 4 is cost versus sales price. This one's actually an underlying consideration for every decision, but it's not ranked higher because ultimately I put the buyer experience first and see what I can fit in the budget after. If you do it the other way around and put profits above the experience, well, that's how developers get a bad rap and get labeled as evil, greedy capitalists. Number 5 is where do the mechanicals, electrical, and plumbing go? MEP. These are, of course, necessary components, but it's ranked pretty low because we have options on where these things can go on the walls. So usually we have some designated areas for risers, for example, but as we get down to the inches, how many pipes, exhaust vents, and how thick they are really start to matter and can shift things throughout the rest of the floor, the roof, and the cellar. And finally, we have structural stability. Of course, your building has to stand up, but just like MEP considerations, structural constraints have some flexibility. We usually come up with an idea and see if our structural engineer will shoot it down or propose some really ugly or expensive support beams to make it possible. So, as soon as you get your team together, it's important to instill this framework into everyone's decision making, because you don't want to be the only one on the team prioritizing every consideration and double checking everyone's work. Instead, make sure they know how everyone should think collectively and entrust them to abide by the framework. This is actually a very powerful leadership concept I got from the book Call Sign Chaos by Jim Mattis, so feel free to check that out. Alright, that is it for this episode. I'll see you in the kitchen for the next episode. Stay curious, noobs.